We are going to get started here this afternoon. We're actually going to start things off by hearing from Garrett Horton. He's going to introduce our main speaker this afternoon. So, Garrett.
Hi, I'm Garrett Horton with Farm Credit Services of America. I'm one of the financial officers serving the Bighorn Basin. We've been happy to be part of the Spring Roundup the last 3 years, I believe. And this year we were happy to provide a speaker for today's lunch. Our speaker comes from Omaha, Nebraska. He's our legislative affairs officer. Prior to that, he worked for two different senators from Nebraska, Chuck Hagel and Ben Nelson. He's a farmer himself and from a little town of Meade, Nebraska, and was a member of 4-H and FFA growing up and attended the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. Please welcome Jamie Nygren.
Thank you very much. I'll get this all set up. Can you hear me okay if I just talk normally? Okay, good. I appreciate the nice introduction. I'd like to also recognize our hosts here at the college. It's been a really wonderful reception to come here this afternoon. I had a nice drive up last evening. Coming down from Billings. This isn't a part of the country I get to very often, so it's very nice to see some different landscape, and I get to meet different and unique people, so I appreciate that. Garrett had mentioned that I'm an employee of Farm Credit Services America. Yesterday was my 7th year anniversary. I just got done with finishing up the 7th year. I work in legislative affairs. And one thing that we talk about when you give a presentation in front of a group of large people like you, what you try to do, and that was said on purpose that way. Yeah. What you try to do is you stand up here and you embellish your strengths. And I think my strength is that I'm an inarticulate attorney with a self-esteem problem, so I'm going to work on that throughout the afternoon, and maybe you'll pick up on some of the things that I say, but not to take me too seriously unless it is such that you choose to take me seriously, which is sometimes what I wish the Congress would do, is take all of us a little bit more seriously, and maybe perhaps some of the things that they do themselves. Garrett also mentioned I'm a farmer. I guess I think of myself as a displaced farmer. I went through agriculture. I guess I was in my teen years and in the college years in the 80s when Mom came along and said, maybe you ought to find something else to do. The farm isn't big enough for both your dad, who's not going to retire, still hasn't, in fact, 25, 30 years later, and yourself, so I need to go find something else to do. So I worked for another farmer for a couple of years. I worked for a fertilizer operation for a couple of years. And then I decided that my brother, who was an attorney in a nearby town, kind of seemed like a pretty good idea. So I went back to school, and then I joined him for a year at a firm. And I decided that, in fact, was not a good thing to do. I became a prosecutor of a little town, and I was 0-2 in my prosecution record for dogs running at large. And I'm like, if I can't prove 2 dogs were running at large, I'm not going to be able to prove anything else either. So I got out of there. I jumped into politics not because of my brilliance when it comes to political things, but because I knew somebody. I'm in a barbershop singing hobby. It's an organization where it's a cappella music and guys get together and they sing once a week. And one of the guys decided to run for the legislature, and he said, Jamie, I'm running for the legislature and I think I'm going to win this thing. He said it kind of a funny way that I can't repeat here. And he said, why don't you come join me and work for me? And I said, well, it's going to be prosecuting dogs. So I thought, okay, I'll give that a shot. And so that was 20 years ago that he won that election, and I've been working for politics ever since. I think what I picked up in those 20 years is that I've learned that I'm really a news junkie. I don't care where the news comes from. It can be NPR, it can be Fox, it can be MSNBC. I like to listen to it, and I like to listen to how they spin the exact same issue in so many different ways that you kind of get even confused as to what your own position may be. I don't think Wyoming people are confused about themselves. I think you folks know yourselves really, really well. And there again, I wish the country could take some lessons from good old common sense and good old fashioned relationship building like we have here in Wyoming, and bring that to DC. Initially, I was going to talk mostly about kind of Farm Bill stuff and what a person might project is going to happen with the Farm Bill, but I saw you had Dr. Young here yesterday, and I'm not even going to pretend to match wits with him. He knows exactly what's going on, and I think he shared with most of you his projections on what may happen with the Farm Bill. I know that he was advanced in his capacity with the Farm Bureau. He's now the Deputy Policy Director with Farm Bureau, so like I say, I'm not going to try to muddle up anything he may have told you, because he's going to know it a lot better than I do, but I will talk about that in passing as we go through this lunchtime period. And then I guess the other thing I'll just talk about, I spent some time in DC working, as was mentioned, with both Senators Hagel and Nelson. Now, those of you that don't know Nebraska, you might understand Hagel's a Republican, and Nelson is a Democrat. And now, if you go to Nebraska, you'll swear Hagel's a Democrat and Nelson's a Republican. And I don't know if that maybe was staff influence, where you get a guy like me who's kind of a moderate, generally speaking, and would prefer to live in a harmonious world where everybody gets along and peace ultimately rules the day. You get Hagel, the Republican, who's characterized as a maverick, and now he's going to be the defense secretary under Obama, the Democrat. So we got all these Republicans in Nebraska really upset. Then you got Ben Nelson, who is the Democrat, who thinks it's awful that people ought to be retiring from their senator position and cashing in on a job once you retire. Well, he just got done being a senator, and he is now insurance association executive director, making $950,000 a year. So congratulations on cashing in, even though you pretend to not like that. Maybe what I'll start by talking about today, what is DC? I mean, what is the landscape? I don't know how many of you, just by show of hands, have been there? Have been in DC? Okay, good. A fair number of you. How many of you are between the ages of 20 and 25? Okay, we got a couple over here, a couple back there. Folks, those are the people who run your government, that run your Congress. We got a whole bunch of staffers in DC, and they're walking around DC, which is a very large landscape, a lot of large buildings. The only thing bigger than the buildings themselves would be congressional egos. And so when you go around DC, you see 20 to 25-year-olds scrambling, kind of pinballing off one another, because they're all looking at their telephone or their cell phones, trying to get policy work done throughout the day. So you see people going around this maze of office buildings, but they're the ones that are assigned the task depending on what their respective areas are. They're the ones giving information to the senators and the congressmen that they're working for. But big picture DC, you all saw Monday's activities. That was the Obama inauguration. Congratulations to him on beginning a second term. He took the oath of office, and the difference between now and 4 years ago is he's not running for re-election. So I'm sure most of you listened to the inaugural speech, and I'm sure you noted that the tenor of that speech changed a little bit from 4 years ago. When 4 years ago, all intentions were to engage. It was to change Washington. It was to play nice. It was to have this purpose over conflict kind of an attitude for 4 years. That didn't happen, and this time around, it's all indications look that this is going to be even a rougher 2 to 4 years than we've been used to. He wants conflict with Republicans. He invites it, and in fact, picked on some issues that are going to be certain to create more conflict than has been in the past. So you got climate change. He mentioned in the inaugural address as one of his primary places that he wants to work on. Well, he didn't mention climate change in any of the elections, of course. Why would he? he would probably lose a state like Wyoming on that one. Of course, he probably lost a state like Wyoming anyway. You got energy. He was talking about energy, and I'll give him credit on this one. He's been pretty consistent in terms of renewable energy and trying to make cars more fuel efficient and all that, but he does slight those energy sources that we do have in place domestically, and so he's ready for that fight. In the context of climate change and global warming, he is going to challenge you folks in the energy industries, particularly coal, natural gas, in favor of some other initiatives he's got in mind. Immigration. He wants to enlist those people who would immigrate into the United States. He does not want to expel them. And on this one, I think there is somewhat agreement that we need to deal with immigration. We need a comprehensive immigration reform, and you can expect that there will be a lot of discussion around that in the next 2 years. I figure Obama has about 2 years with which to get something accomplished, because after the midterm elections, he's done. They call it lame duck. You're all familiar with that. So for 2 years, we got immigration to worry about, we got gun control to worry about, and then the tax spending issues, of which I heard at his presentation just the last hour, having to do with all the fiscal cliff things. While we got through one particular cliff, we got another one about 3 months from now that's going to come into play again. We keep raising the debt limit, and we keep ignoring our spending problems, and that's something that eventually they're going to have to deal with. One interesting point, I was looking at ABC News, Washington Post poll. They do a lot of polling throughout the year, and one part of the data that they look at is which political party right now has favor among constituents. And this is nationwide. It's not Midwest, it's not Pacific Northwest or mountain region, anything like that. This is nationwide. And what we have is Democrats, their favorable rating has dropped from 50% to 49, just a small decrease in their rating. The unfavorable rating for Dems has gone down from 46 to 42. So they've actually made a gain of about 5 to 6% net when you consider both sides. Democrats are definitely gaining favor. Republican favorable rating dropped from 44, wasn't very high to start with, all the way down to a 39 at election time. And their unfavorable ratings went from 52 to 53, so they had a really tough time. Now, among the Republicans, you had the Tea Party people. Their favorable is 35 to 32, which is down quite a bit as a percentage of what it was. And then their unfavorable ratings went from 40 to 46. So what you'll find is that the far right reaches of the Republican Party are where we're having a lot of trouble in terms of people liking what they stand for. If you happen to belong to that category, I'm just giving the message. I'm not saying that that's the way I think about it. But I just as a find out how engaged you folks are, what would you say is the top issue of the day? And we'll see if we match. I got about 10 of them listed here, and I'm just curious how many of these we can knock out. Okay, spending is number 3.
Gun control.
Gun control is not one of them unless you lump it in with social issues, which is gay marriage, pro-life, pro-choice issues, but gun control could maybe fall into that. All right, others?
How about entitlement?
Entitlements. Boy, I think that too would fit probably in federal deficit. No, number 1 should be pretty apparent, but maybe not in Wyoming. I suspect everybody here has jobs and things to do, but it's the economy and jobs is number 1. Healthcare, number 2, federal deficit 3. You got education's number 4, so people are still concerned about educating their kids, which is a very good thing. National security and the building of a good defense is right up there. And then you get down to a little few, some of the lower tier ones, you get energy, environment, and immigration. And those are the ones that the president seems, at least in my opinion, more engaged in. The lesser ones that are actually going to create bigger difficulties in that upper tier is if he's successful doing that. Now the people driving economy and jobs, that's both Democrats and Republicans. Everybody is concerned about this deficit thing, so why do they keep kicking it down the road? I have no idea why they're doing that. When it comes to health care, that tends to be a Democratic and female issue. A federal deficit tends to be Republican males who want to take care of that. Education, again, Dems and a female demographic. National security, Republicans, guys. And social issues, Dems, female. Energy, environment, Republicans. Oh, no, energy, Republicans. Environment, Democrats. And immigration, believe it or not, is a Republican-dominated issue. If you look through the studies of both parties, Republicans are the ones that want to get the immigration matter handled more desperately than the other side. So I think that's interesting. Gun legislation would not have been an issue, but for the fact of some shootings of late that you're all aware of. I've come to find out the NRA announced yesterday that there's a company called Ruger, I think is a gun manufacturer. They're they're manufacturing a new pistol. They're calling it the Congressman. It doesn't work and you can't fire it. So be looking for one of those in the Cabela's or the Dick's store near you. One other thing, Senator, I guess now Vice President Biden was speaking to a group of fifth graders in Virginia about gun legislation. You know, he's real animated. He gets real big and he starts clapping his hands. He's talking to these fifth graders and he says, you know, kids, every time I clap my hands, there is another violent death somewhere in the United States caused by gunfire. And he just keeps clapping. And finally, one obviously distressed little fifth grader says, Mr. Vice President, please quit clapping. In D.C., a joke like that gets you fired. I think you can take it here. Let me get back to my notes. That's the thing, I don't do this very often, so I was appreciative of the fact for being invited out, but I need to brush up my skills here and be able to transition from one topic to the next without appearing as awkward as I obviously am at this point. We talked about what concerns people, and one of the biggest things, of course, is the budget, and I just want to talk about the gimmicks that they do in Washington, D.C. to get around some of these discussions. Yesterday it was mentioned about an hour ago, this no budget, no pay thing. If you don't, Congress has agreed, and the House has passed a bill, and I think the Senate's inclined to pass the same thing, that if, in fact, they don't get a budget passed this year, which they haven't for the last 4 years, they're going to withhold the paychecks of our congressional leaders. So, I mean, it's a nice statement, but it's hooey. I mean, they're going to have this money set aside. They're going to get paid eventually because they're going to have to do a budget eventually. But it's a gimmick, just like saying we're going to raise the debt ceiling and talk about these issues 3 months later. That's all a gimmick. They're just prolonging the inevitable, which is to get to these discussions. So you just need to think about the way they spin votes and why congressional people do what they do. Their number one overarching concern when it comes to voting is that they never want to be inconsistent. And that comes from, I don't remember if it was Al Gore or John Kerry, but one of those senators who was running for president some time ago said the famous phrase, I was for it before I voted against it. And so that's the one thing, you can be for lowering taxes. Consistently, you can vote 9 times to lower taxes, but the one time you raise it, you have an inconsistent vote, and that's the one that your opponent in a would-be election coming up later is going to pick on, and they're going to show you're inconsistent. So what you get is people drawing the lines in the sand, and they say, I'm not going to cross it. You hear it talked about as giving a pledge or something like that to an anti-tax organization. That pledge is actually the way Congress likes to operate. They draw the line, they don't cross it, because then they feel like they're offending their own principles. And actually, I think we could probably serve ourselves a little bit better if you can allow yourself to adapt or moderate your positions if, in fact, the times warrant it. They also like purity. If the NRA has a whole bunch of or a bunch of legislation that they're defending or advocating, they make scorecards about your votes. So if I go to you and you're a congressman, you like to be told to everybody, I have a 100% NRA rating. Anything short of that leaves just a little bit of possibility that if you're an NRA member, you might vote against that person because there is that little piece where you missed the purity test. Well, they on the Hill, every one of them know that that's what motivates one another, is purity and their overarching concern about never crossing their own line. So what they try to do is muddle up legislation with a whole bunch of conflicting priorities. So if you're for immigration, as an example, and you say, I'm for comprehensive immigration, you have two sides of this debate. Well, shall we provide amnesty for those that don't want? Shall we provide amnesty for those 12 million illegals who are already in the country? Or should we close the borders? Well, let's do both. So if you do both, voting for an overall package is going to offend one of your principles, whichever the case may be. You might say, I don't want amnesty, but I want border control. If they're both in there, you can't vote for one without accidentally or as a consequence voting for the other one. So that's what they do. They try to build these conflicting priorities into bills and force one another's hands and then just see who politically can spin their way out the best. So that's exactly how it operates. I will talk about the agriculture committees a little bit. I don't know if Dr. Young was able to talk about it very much yesterday, but the Senate Agriculture Committee, I'm going to move here just a little bit. I didn't know I was going to have a camera. Senate Agriculture Committee consists of Senator Stabenow as the chairman. She is a person from Michigan. We call them Michiganders. And she tends to favor fruit and vegetable production producers, organic production. She is a big-time nutrition advocate, and then is also one who represents urban agriculture, probably a little bit more than commodity ag and agricultural state. She is more of a manufacturing state, auto industry, but nonetheless is agriculture chairman. You got Senator Cochran, who's from Mississippi. He's a southern guy who the Senate was missing last year in the deliberations on constructing a Senate farm bill. He used seniority to knock out Senator Roberts of Kansas in that position. And so you can see him come in when it comes to farm bill. He's going to try to protect southern agriculture, the peanut guys, the rice, cotton, etc. Roberts is still on the committee, the Kansas senator, so he's going to be the one protecting crop insurance. He was one of the authors of the original language that put together the crop insurance program as we know it today. And you got Senator Leahy, who's a high-ranking Democrat who is the protector of all things dairy. He's from Vermont, and he is also a former chairman. Joe Hans, my home state, former USDA secretary. He is a moderate Republican, I guess you would say. He's not flashy. He's kind of just all business. He's all agriculture all the time. He supports crop insurance, and just even today there was an article about him, again, supporting crop insurance as probably the primary thing that is necessary in Farm Bill. He refers to ad hoc disaster payments relating the stories of the 2000 ad hoc disaster payment system, which paid out over $30 billion that year. That's 12 years ago, $30 billion. And then after Hurricane Katrina, which was the New Orleans one, there was a $4 billion payout just on that event alone. Well, this year, because of drought, there's going to be about, well, it's ranging from about 11 to 16 billion, I think is the number, but it's an insurance program. People have been paying into this insurance fund for some time. There haven't been, major cash-ins when it comes to crop insurance until this year. Well, now that we got a farm bill that's up, it's become of major interest to people that we're going to be paying out $16 billion. There's a place where we can save, but they don't take into consideration that there haven't been payouts over the last 7-8 years. And in fact, it's actuarially sound, and it's a great public-private relationship that we have in the crop insurance industry. So it's not something to, hopefully, it's something that they won't mess with. Trying to think of some other significant parts of that Senate Ag Committee. We got 2 people from Iowa, R and a D, so they're a purple state. They got both in the Senate Ag Committee, and the same is true in North Dakota. They got a new lady senator, woman senator named Heidi Heitkamp, joining their other senator, Hoven, not sure how you pronounce that, but both R and D turned that state purple. So there's a lot of Midwest influence on the farm bill, so you can bet crop insurance is going to stand a pretty good chance of surviving any new discussions, with the exception of Cochran being in charge, and so maybe he'll lay down one of those over my dead body kinds of comments. On the House side, you got Lucas. He's the Southern guy, and he's still in charge of writing the bill. So he's Southern. He's going to be there to protect me. He has been one of those guys saying, over my dead body, we're going to pass a farm bill, unless everybody is included. So a lot of times the Southern crop guys were feeling left out last year, and he's not going to let that happen. Everybody's going to have options that they're going to be able to look to under this new farm bill. And now that Cochran on the Senate side is there to help and support Lucas, who's an Oklahoma guy, you can bet there will be a farm bill a little bit more moderate in its terms. Peterson is the ranking member. He is a former chairman from Minnesota. He's a Democrat, and he acknowledges we, as the House of Representatives, are very good at doing nothing. It's one of his favorite lines. But he says he's not going to even engage in a farm bill discussion unless he can get assurances from Boehner and Cantor, who are the Republican leaders who are not inclined to be engaged in agriculture legislation at all. But until he gets them to agree that we're going to have floor time, Peterson says he's not even going to work on a farm bill. Congressman King from Iowa looks to be perhaps the next chairman of agriculture because of self-imposed Republican term limits on being chairman. King is from western Iowa. He's very conservative. You probably see him on Fox News a lot talking about immigration, talking about social issues. But he got put on a subcommittee in a very big role. He's going to be the one looking at nutrition title of the Farm Bill, and he's also going to be the one in charge of overseeing all the activities of USDA and in essence auditing their work and finding out whether there's waste, fraud, and abuse, which is a favorite line for the budget hawks. And then he will be counterbalanced by Congresswoman Fudge. She's a Cleveland lady on the Democrat side who believes nutrition is everything. So we got one guy who's going to be really critical of nutrition programs, and on the other side, somebody who's just totally supportive of everything having to do with nutrition. And so that's going to be quite an interesting battle as well. Thing about the Farm Bill, it's like I say, when it comes to relationship building, that's kind of the key. If you want to be angry with somebody, just make sure you don't get personal with them, because at that point you will get nothing done. So you want to maintain relationships, and as you get those personal pot shots in, at least say to my good friend or to the respected gentleman from Wyoming or whatever the case may be, before you tell them what jerks they are. But let's look at rural influence when it comes to Farm Bill. We are a dwindling group collectively of influencers in agriculture. 16% of the population in the United States is rural and interested in agriculture. Well, that means roughly 16% of our representatives in DC come from rural backgrounds and are actually supporting the rural. So Stabenow, Peterson, Lucas, you go right down the board. At some point they said, doing an extension of the Farm Bill is stupid. We're not going to proceed that way. It's just irresponsible. And then, of course, January 1, or right around the end of the year, beginning of the year, they extended the Farm Bill for a year. And it wasn't because of the great influence that all of us had on Congress. I think rural America, generally 100%, was all saying, let's get something done when it comes to the Farm Bill. But that's not why it happened. What happened ultimately is the Washington Post, the New York Times, all of the broadcast networks were telling people that a gallon of milk was going to go up to $7. And that is when the Farm Bill passed. And I think that should be a wake-up call for us. Nobody was engaged, not nutrition people, not the Northeast states where most of the Agriculture Committee people are now. Were engaged until moms started calling and saying, my kid's milk is going to cost $7 a gallon. So we need to take issue with that, and we need to become more engaged. Sad part is when it comes to 2013, the same scenario is playing out. They don't want to deal with it. They've already said they're not going to take the Farm Bill up probably now until April, because they want to see if they have a budget to work with first. Well, when April comes, they're going to say, well, we don't want to be working on this right now because we've got spending cuts that we got to employ. We got, you know, the nutrition advocates aren't going to want to proceed because they're going to try to cut it by billions. The production side isn't going to want to proceed because they're going to want to protect crop insurance, et cetera, et cetera. So pundits have been saying there's a 50-50 chance of a farm bill passing in 2013, which means there's a 50-50 chance that at the end of next year, we're going to have the exact same thing, which is no farm bill. Perhaps we should extend it and consider this for another day. So it's a sad cycle, and I'm sorry that I got to come here and report that to you today. Animal care is a really interesting one. I'm sure most of you read all the accounts of HSUS and what an awful organization they are. And I agree. They're a very, very complicated group of advocates, animal care advocates. Now, they do a great job of raising money. For $19.99, you can get a subscription to their newsletter and save puppies. But what you don't realize is that you're not saving puppies. You're actually helping them advance their agenda, which is to, a lot of people say, end animal agriculture as we know it. And maybe that is their ultimate goal. But at least for now, it's to increase monumentally the cost of dealing with agricultural regulations to raise livestock, so that it does make it very difficult for you to raise animals. But there again, we got this HSUS group not only advocating on behalf of animals, they're also causing agriculture to talk amongst themselves, and they're finding wedge issues is what's happening. So they managed to get a petition through California, which is going to expand the size of egg-laying hen cages, battery cages they call it. So while they got Californians to agree to that, you all of a sudden got the United Egg Producers, that's EGG, egg producers, in DC saying, oh my gosh, all of our California people are at a really strong, severe disadvantage to our producers in Iowa, Nebraska, Wyoming, you name it, wherever they have eggs raised. And so they said, we need a national standard. Well, that's exactly what HSUS wanted. They wanted to divide the livestock industry, get a national standard on animal care, and in fact now have the agriculture industry paying to get that done instead of them having to go state by state and getting it done. And then the other thing is Farm Bureau, Farmers Union, most of them are all saying we want a market-based approach to how we handle animals. Well, HSUS doesn't lose sight of that fact, so they have gone to Applebee's and Burger King and McDonald's and Walmart, and they've managed on a market-based decision-making to get the executives of all these large corporations changing their views from a consumer perspective on how animal care is treated. So while our eyes in agriculture were on how do we defend ourselves against these petition drives, they kind of did a bait and switch on us, and they started working with executives of the people who buy our products. And that is just, I think we lost sight of that one. So HSUS, bad enemy, but I think what it points out is that we just have a lot of work to do to match wits with their efforts in advocacy. I know in Wyoming there are a lot of concern about private property rights. There is a Supreme Court case being decided sometime between now and June having to do with property development. And really it's a simple case. The guy has 15 acres and he wants to develop 4 of them. Well, before he can get the development done, he's got to get a permit. And in order to get the permit, there were a whole bunch of limitations put on what he could do with the other 11 acres of the 15. He had to use it to mitigate whatever damage he was causing environmentally. So we don't know if he'll get this permit or not. It's been 19 years since he applied to get the permit. And the question is, if you have these unreasonable expectations of how you're supposed to handle your property that you're not developing, is it a taking? And so that's ultimately the question. So anytime you see the Interior Department or EPA or Fish and Wildlife Service, I guess they're part of Interior, telling you, yeah, you can graze these public lands or you can graze your own lands, provided you mitigate somewhere else. What the question becomes, are they taking your property because they're telling you how to run it? So there's some big issues there to be concerned about too. Oh, I wrote a note here. Ed Schultz, I don't know how many of you know him. He hosts a show on MSNBC, and this morning he was upset. So something good must have happened today in DC. I got another couple of pages I could go through, I guess, but I don't really want to bore you with those details. Are there any questions? Maybe that's what I should do. I could go to questions, or I got even a few more jokes I could refer to. And if you don't like the presentation at all, you can just stand up and leave. And I don't have any problem with that either.
Not for that reason.
Yeah. Now, the difference between a congressional representative and a bullhead, one is a low-life, bottom-feeding or bottom-dwelling mud feeder, and the other one's a fish. So, I don't blame you for leaving now. I was, when I was staffing in D.C., I guess just to give you a perspective of how this happens, you end up with about 12 meetings a day. It takes about 6 hours. Everybody gets a half hour of time. And so in a half hour's time, you'll have a group of advocates come in. It can be agriculture, it can be, I was responsible for like trade and immigration and energy, environment, all those kinds of things. So I could have just a whole bunch of different interests come in every day. So the first 10 minutes of this half hour, you're talking to them, just kind of who are you, where do you come from, what's your background. The second 10 minutes, they're talking about what it is they're there to talk about. And then the last 10 minutes, if the member is ready and available, then he or she comes in and visits with them the last 10 minutes, of which they repeat the middle 10 minutes, everything they just told you as a staffer. And if the congressional person isn't available, then the last 10 minutes you're kind of looking at one another kind of in that awkward phase. Well, I had one group come to me and say, we saw you taking notes, and we're just curious, what is your takeaway from our meeting today? So they really put me on the spot. You could tell that they'd gone through enough meetings and were cynical enough about government after their day on the Hill. So I said, well, if you really want to know, the first thing I wrote here is wash pickup. They didn't find the humor in it, but they came around once I did finally read back to them everything they told me. They were a little bit more comfortable with what it was. I grew up on a hog farm, and I was relayed a story once about how, when it was time to breed the sows, there was one guy in the nearby county who would bring the sow, a particular one that he wanted to get bred. She was a prize sow, and she was going to mate her up with a prize boar. So we put him in the pickup, put her in the pickup, drive it over to the guy who had the boar, and then they do whatever it is they do, and then bring it back. And then, the guy who owned the sow said, how am I going to know if she's still open or if she actually got bred? He says, well, what you do is the next morning you see if she's wallowing in the mud. And if she is, that means she got bred. Or if she's walking around a pasture, in which case we know she's still open. You need to bring her in for another day. So, well, sure enough, the sow was in the pasture walking around. So he loads her up in the pickup, take off for the guy who owns the boar. They do what they do. He brings her back. Second day, still walking around in the pasture. Happens again for the third day. And the fourth morning, the guy says to his wife, hey, is that sow wallowing in the mud, or is she walking around the pasture? And the wife says, well, no, it's in the pickup, honking the horn, ready to go. only to an agriculture audience do you get to tell that. So anyway, I'll just conclude on where people get information. Some of you come to events like this and hopefully get enough insight and education on what's going on. But most people actually still listen to candidates and campaigns when it comes to making their decisions on who to send to D.C. A lot of people now are turning to cable TV. Like I said, I would say this is probably more of a Fox crowd, but I would encourage you to watch MSNBC just so that you got a really broad understanding of how the exact same issue can be spun in different directions. Broadcast TV is third. That's your ABC, NBC, CBS. The ones that are most readily available is where people get information. And then, of course, academics. People like the Farm Bureau economist that was here, and people here at the college who know the business really very well. The other side of this is political engagement. I always find it interesting to find out who's engaged. Only 25% of the people actually donate money to campaigns, which actually I think that's a high number. I wouldn't have thought 25%, but 23 people connect to their congressional representatives through social media, and that, of course, would have been 0 as little as 20 years ago, but that's already up to a quarter of the population. 13 subscribe to online news, so they get online and get their news. 10% participate in political rallies and meetings. 10% volunteer their time, and 54% do none of that. So we're not an engaged public when it comes to politics, and I hope someday that can change, but as long as there's a cynicism in DC, and it starts at the top. Our leaders are angry, therefore we have the right to be angry. If they could work through their cynicism, their mistrust, their anger, and their lack of ability to build relationships, we would follow. I know that we would. And so I think there is a day when we'll find civility in politics again, but like everything, it's cyclical. Just like agriculture, it's cyclical. So that's how I'm going to conclude my remarks, and wish everybody the best in what you do. I will address questions. I'll hang around for a while if anybody has anything that I may have touched on that you may agree with or disagree with. But appreciate the time, and thanks very much.